G'day, guys. Welcome to this week's HashItOut. I'm CW, and joining once again, we have Noah and Armin here. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, so this week we're going to talk about black boxes. There's sort of a number running around the ecosystem or the industry. Let's sort of delve into what a black box is and sort of how that ties into sort of different entities and projects and all that sort of stuff within the industry as a whole. So let's kick it off.
Sure, I'll start. There's a term floating around there in the crypto space. They call it the minimum attack vector, right? And it's how distributed system is. How many actors would it take to theoretically create an exploit, right? And the idea in a trustless system is you want distributed assumptions, right? You want that minimum attack vector to be, high enough that it's acceptable for you. Let's just say that, right? And we get into this problem where you have certain aspects in the crypto industry, and I'll pick on closed source code, right? It's a great example here. You could have a network that has the highest minimum attack vector in the space. Okay, whatever that is. And suddenly you put your funds in a black box and you're in like a Schrodinger's cat situation where you don't know, right? And what is anything times zero?
Yeah, exactly.
Zero. Yeah. So then all of a sudden that minimum attack vector, it's not even one in my opinion there. It's Schrodinger's cat. It's either a problem or it's not a problem. And then if it is a problem, hopefully you're not exposed to that problem when it, reveals itself, when someone opens the box and people realize they have a problem. And it's funny to me that, there's this idea of like, decentralization and, increasing your minimum attack vector, on the base layer, but you really have to assume that once you start getting into, let's say a wallet, an application, a rollup, you're accumulating attack vectors on top of each other, right? And so your assumptions actually get really complex if you actually try to break down and follow, what you are working with. Right. And so we do see exploits from time to time, even a smart contract, you can say, okay, is there keys that control it? That is an attack vector. And, it very well could be, you're in a black box situation where the reality is you don't know. It's Schrodinger's cat.
So you've touched on a couple of things there, like MAV. That was a pretty good explanation of that. But the term black box as well, we throw that around quite often, especially on this show. What does that actually mean for the average user?
I would call it Schrodinger's cat situation, right? You can, let's look at FTX as a good example. Now we know the cat was dead. Right? We know the cat was dead. Like there's a back door there. They're, taking everybody's funds and, who knows what. I guess they were, turned off their liquidation for that, aspect of Alameda. And, so they made themselves invincible and then they fell through a hole in the floor and they just kept falling. But the reality is they could have been insolvent for a long time. There could have been an issue inside the box is the cat. We don't know if it's alive or dead. It could have been dead for months, and the exchange was still operating, right? And that's kind of the scary thought about black boxes in crypto as a whole is there could be a lot of dead cats out there, and there could be a lot of people that are exposed to that liability that have no idea, right? Yeah. They just have no idea. And so, in my opinion, the goal of decentralized networks should be to be trustless. And what does that mean? It means that the assumptions that people have to make are as small as possible. You want to minimize that. And that gives you better assurance in terms of attack vectors. But if you're, coming out of a closed source wallet into a closed source, contract setup, it very well could be, you have a dead cat along the way, you don't know, and then whoops, you got a problem. And the same thing is true with exchanges. We can't see into them. The same thing is true with mining pools. We cannot see into them. And so, there's always a risk, right, that there could be some form of attack. Now, whether it's, as asinine and blatant as FTX, where they're just backdooring everybody's funds and shit gambling with them, or if it's people are, being scraped, right? Take a nickel off the top over and over again and just office space people, who knows? The reality is, when you are in that situation, you just have to call it what it is. People don't like that, right? It's not popular. You're not going to make a lot of friends in this space. But nonetheless, it protects users because at least the assumptions are known.
Yeah, I mean, a good example that comes to mind for me, just personal experience, was, I don't know how long ago it was, but many months ago, I accidentally burned a bunch of my Ergo assets because I was experimenting with some new centralized swap where you could swap Ergo to other mineable coins. And it connected with Nautilus, but it was closed source and there was a bug and it didn't account for the change box in the transaction. So everything that was supposed to, and I think just the way that all of my UTXOs were sort of organized, I think my whole wallet got sent and all of that was supposed to go to the change box. So everything got burned. And I didn't know. I didn't really know what I was doing. That was before I'd sort of smartened up to using a test wallet. And that's a black box where the user doesn't really know what's going to come out the other side. And it doesn't. There have been cases where black boxes are nefarious, and there are cases where maybe they're skimming for profits, or maybe there's no nefarious activity, but there's mistakes and the users don't know. If you can't verify, you're in a situation where you're trusting the application or the wallet or whatever it may be, and you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think one of the things in that scenario is sort of using the analogy that Armenia sort of uses, the first one over the hill sort of often ends up first on the spear. Yeah. And unfortunately, in your case, mate, you copped that one on. So, but with that service as well, I think the way it was rectified as well, the total engagement from the developer and everything working with you and things like that, like the resolution was well intended, I'd have to say.
Definitely. Yeah. But it's not always like that, Oh,
100%.
It's not always like that. And sometimes people create boxes and in the reality is they don't necessarily have a bad intent.
Yeah.
But they still are putting users in a situation where the cat could be dead.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
And, the reality is that's hurt a lot of people along the way in this space. Now, you also have the other side of the coin where you have, a closed environment and there is manipulation going on, right? And sometimes, it's massive and other times, it's just skimming, right?
Yeah,
but
like you said,
the reality is if we want to improve as an industry, we need to push for trustless assumptions.
Yeah. Just today there was a big wallet hack in the Algorand ecosystem, and I don't know much about Algorand or the wallet that was hacked, but just doing a bit of clicking just while we've been talking. I can't find a GitHub or anything close to it. They have a terms of use for the wallet, so that's interesting.
Use at your own risk.
But they do store improperly or something.
I don't know.
Probably.
I heard that the hacker was able to change wallets' seed phrases or users' seed phrases.
Stuff. Oof,
Yeah.
That's painful. You know, it's one of those things where I feel bad for people that are, you know, currently going to check their account either now or tomorrow and get the, you know, stomach punch of seeing their funds are gone. But, you know, in a way, that is why over and over and over, I've tried to beat the drum. Pay attention to that because you don't know. You don't know.
Yep.
And it really makes no sense to me that someone would say, "Oh, look at, you know, this application or this, you know, network, and look at how decentralized it is," and, you know, rah marketing nonsense, and then immediately go into a Schrodinger's cat situation. Like, what's the point? It doesn't matter how, you know, decentralized the network is. If you multiply anything by 0, you're back to 0.
Yeah, well, just using a chain sort of analogy, you're only as strong as your weakest link sort of thing. And you could have all the metrics in your favor across the board for the entire ecosystem, and utilizing that one sort of weak link everyone come unstuck with, like you said, with a dead cat.
Yeah. And one thing that I do appreciate with the Ergo ecosystem is there is a lot of alpha and beta testing that tends to go into applications where, you know, developers invite people, say, hey, don't use a lot of funds, use a test wallet, you know, play around, break things, you know, help us improve the ecosystem. And that type of community testing really has helped a lot.
Yeah. Building trust, battle testing, everything. A number of things have come to light from utilizing that service from sort of technical users, everyday users. So having that broad spectrum of people engaging with the platform can sort of turn out different results at certain times and things like that. And ultimately, if you're just testing for one sort of vector or one sort of scenario, you're not going to capture everything. So it's great to see, especially like you said, in the Ergo ecosystem going on.
The worst thing that happens in crypto, in my opinion, is people try to build incredibly complex things while they're in a horse race. You know, with other projects.
For sure.
Push it to market, win token, win this, when are you going to launch? And, you know, depending on the complexity that's involved, you know, I think just saying soon and battle testing things until it's appropriate is necessary.
Yeah. I mean, time and time again, we've seen people that, or projects that try to rush to sort of make the sprint, the bull market sprint, just get burned in the end. And I mean, now look at the market anyway. It's like, was it even worth it?
Yeah, we got time.
Yeah, we got nothing but time. So it's definitely better to take the time and, you know, cross all your T's, dot all your I's, so to speak.
The thing in that sort of scenario that kind of highlights, like, you can lose a lot of trust instantly in that scenario where you could have a really great product, sort of revolutionary and everything like that, but one little exploit and you may as well sort of go and dig your own grave, basically, because you've lost the community on that front. And to try and instill that trust back, like, you've got a long road ahead of you.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where even if trust is lost in a project, if things are done right, maybe they shouldn't have to trust in the first place, you know? Like, if their code is open, if they've had people testing, even if things go wrong, my gut says that there's at least a sense of goodwill and I don't know.
I think that assumptions tend to get so complex that explaining them to the average person, number one, is hard. And number two, users don't care. They just don't care. They haven't necessarily been taught that in many cases. You could use the example of like layer twos, right? Rollups. Everyone will say, oh, the rollup inherits the security of the base layer. And that is true that it does settle on the base layer, right? That's true. But it's also completely false if you look at the additional assumptions that you inherit from the rollup itself. What's the sequencer, or who's providing proofs, or how distributed is it? Like, there's a lot of complexity there that you never hear. You always hear like, oh, it inherits the security of the base layer, and it's like, yes, but you got to finish that sentence. And when you get into things like zero knowledge proofs and a lot of complex mathematics, your assumptions just kind of go dark, right? In cryptography, the best thing that shows strong designs is time, right? Time. There's been plenty of cryptographic frameworks that everyone assumed to be true, and then at some point, the assumptions didn't hold, or maybe the assumptions themselves are solid, but then you have to implement it, and that's a whole nother engineering challenge. But it inherits the security of the base layer. It drives me a little nutty.
It's great
because people don't care, and it takes a lot of, you got to chew on a lot to dissect certain things. What's the assumption of the chain and the wallet and the smart contract and the rollup, and how do you add those figures together and assume trust, right? That's really complicated, and to some degree, I would say in many cases very, very, very hard, if not impossible, especially when you're getting into new cryptographic frameworks that may or may not be true. Like, that in and of itself may be a cat.
Yeah, well, that's a great scenario and really good sort of thought experiment there as well, because you might have on paper fantastic models, everything like that, engineer it, everything's running smoothly, but ultimately over time the assumptions don't hold, and unfortunately time is the deciding factor in that scenario. It's a tricky one because ultimately people will be burned at the end of it. So whether you're the first one over or you're the 10th person, 100th, 1000th person sort of thing, interacting with that sort of scenario, and it just takes one little glitch and sort of many people's funds and projects, et cetera, reputations are all at risk.
I'll publicly say that, sitting on the sideline to some degree, I fully expect the next huge exploit in the crypto space to be either the assumptions of somebody's implementation of zero knowledge fails, or their implementation, how they actually engineered it, is going to have some issue, and it'll cause, it'll be like the bridge issues that we saw in the past. I'll throw that out there. I fully expect that, sadly. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why I think that will happen is because people are trying to design incredibly complex things in a race to market. Yeah. And that is a terrible condition for quality.
That's like what we were just saying. And especially with zero knowledge, like rollups or whatever you're working on, it's like the market is so competitive for that. Everybody wants it. And at the same time, it's like
nobody understands it.
You should take years to figure this shit out because nobody's done it, and nobody's cracked the code on it, so to speak. It's going to be a little scary to watch.
One of my favorite things about Ergo, that has always been one of my favorite things, is it's built on conservative assumptions.
Yeah,
built on conservative. Yeah, time-tested conservative cryptography. So maybe in 3 years, we'll see a lot of we'll see a victor emerge in kind of the zero knowledge race, right? And at that point, okay, you have time under your belt. We'll probably see some issues or failures in the space. And once time has showed maturity and basically showed that, certain frameworks are solid, it's worth adopting.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about trying to build a trustless system, you have to be conservative. You do not want your trust to be zero.
Yeah. And ultimately, that's what it all comes down to, isn't it? Really, that's the whole thing about the whole point of these systems is to build them trustlessly and interact with them trustlessly. But time builds that trust, if that makes sense. Like, it's a funny sort of description, utilizing trustless systems, but you do then have to trust whatever, like the assumption that's holding, etc.
Yeah, I mean, cryptography is about assumptions.
Yeah.
And so ideally, how do you build like an end-to-end trustless stack? That's an ongoing challenge in this space. I think that unfortunately along the way, people just look at one part and then forget about everything else, which makes no sense to me, but it's you get into a lot of complexity, right? Just because something is open source doesn't mean there's not, a 0-day exploit, potentially there that nobody has found or used yet, right? And that could be a cat. It has been in the past in this space. So having like full assumption of trustlessness is actually very, very, very hard to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, even like last year, I think there was some old Java dependency that bricked like all of AWS and all these online web services, and it's like at each layer of your tech stack, like things can go wrong.
We even had some people where they came out with a new M1 chip and there was a vulnerability there that caused them to lose some money, and it was not necessarily the crypto stack, it was the hardware stack that they were using.
Yep.
There's a ton of attack vectors out there that even when you take it like beyond just the network code and take it into your device, right? A lot of people have a browser wallet as they're browsing the internet and clicking on links and Discord and an email and whatever, and one click and boop, things can evaporate.
That's a good example, actually. And then the MetaMask situation where you can basically click on something like a nefarious link or an NFT sort of drains your wallet and all that sort of stuff. So I know a number of people have been burned in that scenario utilizing that wallet.
There's a lot of assumptions that people don't understand that they interact with every day.
Yeah. In the Ergo ecosystem, I think the emphasis on knowing your assumptions, like we saw the paper that Alex has put out, the know your assumptions in regard to cryptography and things like that. I think the community does a really sort of good effort to try and educate people in our ecosystem to ask the right questions. And you see it time and time again, depending on what platform it is, whether it's Twitter, Telegram, Discord, Reddit, et cetera. The discourse that we have in our ecosystem, it's unlike any that I've ever seen, to be honest, throughout the entire industry. And that's one thing that I'm really proud of, that people do engage on that level.
It's something that needs to be discussed in this space. It's the bottom line. Like if crypto's ever to succeed in terms of its original intent, we really need to be focused on assumptions.
Yeah.
Right. That's something that when you get into kind of the shitcoin gambling side of crypto, nobody cares. Nobody cares. If they're willing to throw, the good chunk of their digital assets into something that's just because they saw something on, Telegram or Twitter or whatever, they're not acting on assumptions. They're just having fun gambling, I guess.
Yeah, you're pulling the lever at the casino.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck. I guess sometimes, people get pumped on and people get dumped on. What can you do, right? But the reality is that's not, in my opinion, the core intent why these systems exist.
No.
And it just distracts from it distracts people from really understanding what their assumptions are and how they can kind of minimize the attack vectors that they're exposed to, because that's how you keep users safe, right? And why do we have third parties? Because users aren't safe. And if we don't focus on assumptions and you have users that are getting hurt, left, right, and center, naturally people are going to say, screw this, the third party's better. And the reality is, if that's not the focus, third parties probably are better, and we've failed.
Yeah, that emphasis away from sort of those core principles and things that we see often time and time again. And more to the point that you just made, it sort of undermines the value of these protocols as well, because I'm sure you guys have been in a real life conversation with someone, and it sort of discusses or starts off and you talk about crypto or whatever. And often the first sort of sentence is, it's not what you think, or something along those lines, because you often hear stories about people shitcoining and this and that, and people getting wrecked and all kinds of sort of scenarios. And like I said, it undermines the actual value of what these protocols can actually sort of achieve.
Yeah, and like you just said, Joe, maybe it, excuse me, sorry. If we have failed, that's kind of where the SEC is at now, swooping in and cleaning up the mess. And
then you get into something that irritates the shit out of me, right? And that is, you get these people in the crypto space that say, "Oh, we're all in the same boat," right? No, forget that. If somebody's doing some shady shit, fuck them. That's what I say. Like, if people are going to run exchanges and practice bad business, fuck them. If people are going to run mining pools and they're going to practice bad business, fuck them. Like, we're not all in the same boat. We're each in our own little boat in the same storm.
Yeah, that's a better analogy.
So the question is your boat solid? And I think that aside from the hype and, the noise in the crypto space, that always needs to be an ecosystem's focus. Is their boat solid?
Yeah.
Yep.
Most definitely.
And that's not always a popular discussion to have, but it's needed.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, like the maturity of the conversation that we have here, once again, quite proud of our ecosystem, the way that we sort of do engage on these conversations, and like just highlighting a couple of projects and the way they kind of go about it and trying to distribute this trustless sort of nature, like Lithos and GetBlock and everything of what they've trying to do and build transparency on the mining pool front. Miners should be like applauding this, screaming it from the rooftops about building this transparency and open share distributions and everything, like contributions and things like that, because ultimately it's open, it's on chain, it's transparent, there's no black box. Ultimately, that's how I want to operate. I want to know the assumptions that I want to assume that everything that I'm contributing in regards to shares is being counted and it's not being scraped or pennied off the top or anything like that. That's just one sort of thing off the top of my head. There's numerous others like DEXs and what they're sort of trying to achieve, like Spectrum, and sort of getting away from the centralized exchange scenario. Machina, what they're trying to do with the order-based books and things. It's the ecosystem as a whole, like very, very proud, like once again, sort of reiterating that fact about sort of how everyone wants to go about their principles here on Ergo.
Yeah, listen, I think we have a great community of developers that go out of their way to try to build good stuff with solid assumptions.
Yeah.
Right. And I appreciate that. I think that is how we protect users. Right. Because the reality is, you get into levels of complexity that, if you're talking about, some type of adoption where you're pulling your grandma into these systems, right? And grandma's not going to
game over, dude.
Yeah, grandma's not going to pick apart these assumptions.
Yeah.
But at the core level, we really need to. And what does that do? It extends that environment of trustlessness to whoever uses it. And like, in my opinion, but I don't care if the SEC goes after bad actors in our space. I really don't care. Like, I have no I have no mercy for them. If they're going to try to exploit people, okay, karma maybe. Now when you have actors that are actually building things with solid assumptions, and then you get into like
Collateral
the government
damage.
yeah, you get into like the tornado cash situation, right? It's like, okay, well, we live in a reality where the wealthy have always been able to offshore their money. They've always been able to hide their income. They have privacy. The average person doesn't have that type of tooling. And so what did something like Tornado Cash do in my mind? It leveled the playing field. Yeah. And it's like, oh, but somebody bad used it. Well, that's kind of their personal choice and something they probably need to answer for. But empowering people in the same way that wealthy people in multiple jurisdictions already have access to, I think that's a net positive. Yeah. But that's a different intent than building some scammy shit and trying to just grift.
Yeah, the cool thing in that scenario is, let me rephrase that. The unfortunate thing is like what happened with the developers and things like that, locked up and everything. But ultimately, the protocol's open source. It's still running today. Yes, there is some sanctions around what is included and what's excluded from blocks and things like that if things have interacted with that protocol. But ultimately, it's still active and it's still live. People can still contribute to it because it is open source. Like, yeah, they tried to take the Gits and there'll be like clones and all kinds of things out there. So that's the other beauty of sort of these decentralized systems is people can spin them up and run them and everything like that. And sort of looking at internally here at our ecosystem with the mixer, you're running it locally as well. So how are they going to then go to every person in the world who's running, say, the Ergo mixer, for instance, and try and disrupt their computer services or whatever, you know what I mean? Like it's say on it time and time again, and like decentralization is localization in that respect.
No, in the Tornado Cash situation, that's just public punishment, right? Yeah. Take them to the town square, beat them down, hang the body, and then, scare the people.
Yep.
Whatever happened with the, I know GitHub took down their repos. How did that shake out? Is it still?
To be honest,
are mixers just not allowed on?
Still on
GitHub?
chain.
Yeah, still on chain.
It's still on chain. The code's still out there.
Yeah.
Good luck killing an idea, especially a good one. And I do think, I know there's a lot of people that are like, oh, privacy. The reality is wealthy people already have, accountants and offshore vectors and ways to, minimize what they show that they have. Yep. It already exists, for the ordinary person, that's usually beyond their access. And so tools that create fair access, I think, are a net positive. Can they be abused? Sure. But, you have to get down to individual responsibility, right? There's a lot of things can be abused.
Yeah.
How like something that I've seen in our ecosystem with the mixer is just, it's an interesting challenge with mixing, because for there to be enough security and sort of enough depth where there's there's a level of anonymity that's a user that's actually trying to be. Wait, what? What's up?
That's the word I almost say, man.
Well, I'm confused. What?
Joe tried to pronounce anonymity once and just couldn't get it out.
Yeah, and I was about to do it again, and Noah saved me.
Oh man. Anyway, with the mixer, there has to be a certain level of depth of users actively using it for the anonymity to be preserved and the DApp to be worth using.
Mm-hmm.
So with Tornado Cash, how did they bootstrap that community where there's enough users that it's there's always sort of
I'd have to go through the history of it. That's not something that I know off the top of my head, if I'm totally honest.
Yeah.
It's a good question. And we've seen some research into outsourceable mixing, potentially putting some incentive there for people to mix if they want. But it's also something that I'm sure that whoever was working on that was looking at the body in the public square thinking, oof, is this worth it? That type of public punishment can be powerful.
And on that front as well, I think it's fair to say that the outsourceable mixing perspective and the ability to then integrate into sort of third-party applications or dApps and things, whether it's wallets, etc. I think that'll be huge for user integration, because ultimately, like we've said numerous times before, do people want to run their own infrastructure? Like that's the hard part of decentralization. Ultimately, is trying to get people to run things locally because they're so used to the web.
People care.
Yeah,
that's the whole point of this discussion. In a way, it's trying to get people to care, and take decentralization beyond just like some marketing term that you'd use on Reddit to try to get people to buy your bags, and run some infrastructure.
That's really the fundamental thing. Even with the mixer, you can try to add as many incentives to use it as you want, but at the end of the day, it's do you want privacy or no?
Centralization takes work, man, and I think that there's a lot of people that are here for the casino, right? There are a ton of coins in the crypto space where I'd log in and I'd look at kind of the socials, and it's like, it's going to go to this. It's going to go to this X. Oh, look at this percent. And, there's no, not a care in the world in terms of assumptions and, how they accumulate and risks. Just not there.
Even just real world use case.
Yeah. Having some sort of viable product underneath all that sort of hype and speculation and everything.
Alternative financial systems or, novel financial products that provide real use to people, regular people. Most of the shit out there, it's such an unusual conversation to be had in this space, which is pretty sad.
Yeah.
It's it's an insane space. That's the only way that I cope with it, is I'm just like, well, it is what it is.
One thing that
crypto baby.
The one thing that really gets me riled up is you try and have an adult conversation with someone in this space about technology and what things, say, for example, Sigma protocols, Oracle pools, different frameworks and things like that, and how sort of they differ to something else, say a centralized Oracle service like Chainlink or things like that. If you try and educate people or try and bring to light what the technology is behind, say, an Oracle pool, people just instantly dismiss it and just say you're shilling and everything like that. Whereas you're trying to come from the perspective of raising these assumptions and sort of try and educate people on the differences between the two. And ultimately, it comes down to people just brushing it off as bag shilling and whatnot.
I mean, frankly, even in our community, I think there's a lot of that where people will, they'll shout Sigma protocols and Oracle pools and look at all the cool shit we have, and they don't even know what they're talking about. And it's it makes me cringe a little bit.
My least favorite thing in crypto is when people are like, oh, they bring in Satoshi, right? And at that point in my mind, they might as well be like, oh, Jesus, blesses my back, right? It's the same thing.
What would Satoshi do?
You know what? Sometimes it trends.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
What would Satoshi do?
Yeah. It's a little silly. But the reality is, if you kind of give misattribution of work or misattribution of an opinion, that is preliminary to straight scamming, in my opinion.
Ultimately,
Like if somebody's, when I see that, in my mind, the red light goes off, like run.
is there any
Yeah, I feel like-
scenarios that you can give in that sort of situation coming to light where your sort of bullshit detector's going off?
There's a ton. I would say USD, definitely. I looked into it. We had the opportunity to, get some listing pairs on exchanges with Terra, exposure. And after like 10 minutes, my red light was flashing. I talked to Alex later that day, and I was like, I've been digging into this, and this seems like some sketchy stuff. I don't see how this is sustainable. And he's like, yeah, sometimes there's a lot of sketchy stuff in DeFi. Okay. But that's how he tends to approach things. Is fully from like the first principle of what's the assumption of this.
Yeah.
And that's a different way of thinking, I think, but it does protect people. That's the point.
It's interesting. You spend enough time in this space, and your bullshit detector gets pretty good if you're at least if you're thinking about this kind of stuff. If you're not thinking about it, then.
But I think that's true with most industries. I don't think it's necessarily just
right.
crypto specific, right? Whenever there's an incentive to make a sale, you hit the salesman.
Yeah, and got the car salesman coming out and preaching from the rooftops that they're selling the best product, etc., etc. And
it's all
is what it is, man. That's human nature. That's not a problem I can fix.
No, certainly not.
Save us, Joe.
Best I can do is bring it up in conversation, and even that is not popular, right? Yeah. It's not popular because the reality is you have people that have a financial incentive.
Yeah.
And so, that financial incentive is going to be what they're going to tend to protect. That was what they're going to be attached to. And so, sometimes if you get people and they're like, hey, Safe Moon is going to change the world, you just say, good luck, have fun.
You just need people to give a shit, really, don't you? Like I said, people to care.
I think, I think that if we engineer, trustless systems the right way, that's huge implications in terms of, potential improvements to human existence and human transaction.
Yeah.
But in my mind, the majority of the space is not in that mindset. It's just number go up and, hit the cycle right and prepare for the next cycle and look at this trade and
accumulate the bottom.
Yeah. I don't know.
It's
well. How about this? What are some things that are getting us excited? We've been pretty cynical today.
No, I think that I think that I'm excited about things with solid assumptions. Yeah. Right. I'm excited for Rosenbridge because from day one they've been talking about assumptions. Yeah. You can look at this other bridge exploits in the space and, it was hidden. It was just marketing. It was like, oh, we're totally trustless. And at the end, it's a multi-sig of 2.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I see value in that long term. That's why I'm here. That's why I enjoy, that is kind of like an experiment. How do we think to build better systems? Yeah. Right. And but, when
yeah, I suppose it's not cynicism if it's just, calling a spade a spade.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you were to say, okay, why are we engineering and designing these ecosystems? You need a first principles based approach. Why are we here? Yeah. And, I would hope, in Ergo, it's to build trustless systems for the average person. Yeah. Just that simple. And so anything that, is, let's just say could be improved, I would hope the community would want to improve it.
Most definitely. Very well summed up. I think that sort of sums up our entire conversation that we've had today. Sort of, we're coming up to time, and I think that's a pretty fitting way to end this conversation. Is there any last words that you sort of want to contribute there?
Well, I think that if you get trustless systems right, there's tremendous value, right? And you know what? Bitcoin has been very powerful. It's not always the most advanced. Some people say, it's archaic and old, but in terms of unstoppable money, it's done pretty damn well.
Yep.
So, I think there's a lot to learn from just a first principles perspective.
I don't have much to add this week, honestly. I'm pretty excited about Lithos. That's
Me too.
where my head has been
Maximum civil resistance. That's cool stuff.
Yeah,
That's real cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm hoping to. I was talking to Rob this morning, and just trying to figure out what to do with Paizo, and it's like, oh, they could take it.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to introduce miners to governance, because we do have a pretty advanced governance kind of underneath the protocol that really hasn't even been played with yet, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so hopefully that'll make it more accessible. And I have to imagine once Lithos is a thing, there will be more eyeballs there than where Paizo could have been. So I'm stoked to collaborate. That's my favorite part of this community, is the collaboration, and it's great.
Very well said. And for anyone who doesn't know, what is Paizo?
So it's a mining governance simulation tool. Lets a user sort of input a bunch of different values, parameters, and then see how that would affect the on-chain governance of different parameters, such as like transaction cost, and like how much data can be fit into a block, things like that. So it gives miners the power to have their voice heard on chain, essentially.
Yep, great little utility there, and nice to pair it there with Lithos and what they're sort of building on their side.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure chatting once again. We got a little bit passionate here. I could probably sort of keep going and clearly speak my mind a little bit further as well on certain topics. So it's been a pleasure chatting once again.
Always. Have a good one.
See you next week.